This is a story. It's a story of a girl who was born and grew up in a little village in the middle of Wales. She grew up and she left and she travelled. And this is a story in pictures, her story in pictures. But to begin with, we probably need to go back before the beginning. So we have a picture here. We have a picture here of a very smart gentleman, hair combed down, got his Sunday suit on, tie on. He's probably in his real life a farmer, and he wouldn't be wearing these clothes every day. This is the great-grandfather of Coral. Coral, who's the subject of our story. This picture was probably taken in Aberystwyth, although they doubtless lived in Llangyrig, where the Bound family, as far as we know, originated. The next picture I can't quite identify. I think it's a grandfather or a grandmother. You wouldn't know with dresses in those days. So I'm guessing it's one of Coral's grandmothers as a little girl. And again, it would have been taken in mid-Wales. Getting closer to our time, here's Dachy Bound, the irascible Dachy Bound, with a cow in the courtyard of their home, Bethlambert. And Bethlambert features in Coral's childhood and in her brother's childhood more prominently. And of course, it's the name of our house now in Australia. Now, this is an impressive family gathering of the Evans family, with Mamgie and Dachy Evans sat in the middle with probably not all of their progeny surrounding them. It was a very big family. And Coral's mother is the rather pretty young woman on the right. And there are brothers and sisters around, Auntie Ogwen, Uncle Dennis, Uncle Mylor, Uncle Will, Uncle Debbie James, all in the picture here. Their home village was Llanellar, and here's the Llanellar church, 700 years old, an ancient, early church in Wales, in Llanellar, the home village. So now we have a picture of Shimne Wen. Shimne Wen is just a tiny farmhouse not far from Llanellar. It's the place where Coral was born, sitting in a paddock off the road under the forested hill of the type that surrounds Llanellar. Another prominent house for Coral would have been Penpompren, which is in the next picture, an aerial photo taken of this little farmlet, which was occupied through the whole of her childhood by the Evans family and is still occupied by the Evans family, by Coral's Auntie Winnie. She would have spent a lot of her childhood in this house. And here's the little girl herself. A little girl with a bow in her hair, pretty little creature, hair tied up in the fashion of those days, looking slightly reflectively at the camera. Probably wondering what this was all about. And so she began to grow up in Llanellar, in this tiny village of just a few hundred people when she was there. And she made friends. Friends have always been very important to her. And here's one of the early friends, Sheila Wilkins, that she sat with her arm around. Note the hairdos, plenty of hair, none of the short cuts in those days. And equally significant now, we have a picture of Coral with two of her school friends. Coral is on the right, and on the left is Margaret Isaac, her longest term friend. She's known her since she was 2 or 3, living across the green in the same village in Wales. Here they are at school, 3 schoolgirls in their probably early teens, I would think. Llanellar was culturally conscious. So they would have Eisteddfodau, and they would have dressing up. And here they are, all dressed up, with Coral sitting on the extreme right. Her mother 2 steps away to her left, and her sister a further 3 steps away to the left. The whole village would engage in these activities, and they wear the typical Welsh tall hat. Coral had a schooling at Dinas, the high school in Aberystwyth, and there were teachers she liked, and there were teachers she didn't like, and this was one of her favourites. The family was important early on. Very important for Coral was her Auntie Ogwen and Uncle Di, and here's a picture of them together. She spent a lot of time in Pontevendigheid, where her Auntie Ogwen lived in her childhood, in holidays and at weekends. So these were two very important people in her life. Perhaps the most important person in her early life was her father, Will Bound. And here she is. She's about to go fishing in the River Ustwith with her dad, who's still arrayed in his bus driver's uniform. And they're about to go down to the river, probably in their waders, and try and catch some trout. Very, very strong affection there. From very early on, she had boyfriends. She's always been interested in boys. This is her first boyfriend, Will Lloyd, a cherubic young fellow from, I think, Pontevendigheid. I don't know how this picture came about, but there he is with his ears sticking out and a big grin on his face. Obviously a very appealing boyhood chum. A little later on, when we're growing up, here we are with a more, I wouldn't say refined, but a more cultivated hairdo with Darrell Northam, one of her other early boyfriends. They're here pictured in Aberystwyth in the, I think it's probably in Terrace Road, where Darrell worked as a barber, and coincidentally was my barber in my first year in university in Aberystwyth when I went there, before I'd met Coral. Before I'd met Coral, I knew one of her boyfriends. Her most significant boyfriend, who is in a somewhat ambiguous pose here on the right, is Richard, the son of the local baker, a cheerful, outgoing lad, still, I think, living in Aberystwyth. He avoided marriage until a little later on. Here's Coral dressed up. Obviously, we're going out. We've got our dress on, we've got our hair made up. We're standing in the garden of Trianva, the family home. And I don't know where she's going, but she's going out on the town somewhere. To me, when I look at this photograph, it makes me think of one of my granddaughters, and I won't say which. Her first employment was at a hairdresser, and you can begin to see the signs of it here, because suddenly she's gone legally blonde, and she's sitting outside the door of the hairdresser's shop with the hairdresser's proprietor's dog in her lap. Now, this was her first work. I think she started work probably at 15 years old as an apprentice hairdresser, and she was very good at it. And that, I think, is a little picture of her childhood and girlhood and early womanhood. You can see that it's a placid environment. It was a loving environment. It would have been a good childhood. It would have been a happy childhood. In the early summer of 1961, a momentous event occurred in Coral's life. At that stage, I was in my second year at university in the University College of Wales in Aberystwyth. And this picture shows the pretty beach and hills and front of Aberystwyth. At that stage, Coral was working as a hairdresser in the town. And for a couple of days at the Home Cafe in Pier Street, we'd sat next to a table of girls, and there was a pretty cheeky girl sat on the next table. I'm not sure whether she was giving me the eye or not, but anyway, we connected, and she told us there was a barbecue on the beach at the end of the promenade, which you can see in the picture here. So I went to the barbecue, and we linked up, and in a sense, the rest is part of history.
Why is my heart so light?
When I left for the summer holidays that year, she gave me this photograph, which was the first photograph I had of her, and I still have it. And in the garden at Trianva, as she was then not yet 17, a 16-year-old young girl in the town where I was studying at the time. We soon became very closely attached to each other. There are some minor ups and downs, but nothing of importance. And this picture shows the two of us together on the steps of the flat where she and her friends were living at the time. She'd taken the dramatic step, I suppose, of leaving home at 16 and setting up in town, a pattern that would be repeated in her own daughter, I have to add. So we were very attached to each other at this time. And in fact, I used to, in the middle of the night, climb out of the window of my digs and onto the road and down to the apartment so that we could be together, which we were.
This is my song.
Things happened then after very quickly, and in a fairly disgracefully short interval we were married on April the 19th, 1962, and here we are standing on the steps of Llanidar Church, the two of us together, married and ready to set out pretty much on a life together.
I care not what the world may say.
From that time on, life picked up pace pretty quickly, but we were still within the family, within the English family for a little while, and the Welsh family. This is a picture of Coral's mother, who was, I think, faintly disapproving of this marriage. I didn't speak any Welsh, which was a bit of a problem. I soon picked up enough to learn when I was being talked about, but she, in time, came to be very fond of me, and that all worked out quite well. But in another disgracefully short period, children started to arrive, and here's John, looking typically dozy, I have to say, in this picture, our firstborn child, born on the 8th of October 1962, so do your math. Then we had a couple of pictures of the generations. Because we'd married so young and started to have children so young, we still had, Coral still had grandparents. And here we have a picture of Coral, her mother, her grandmother, and John, the four generations. Grandmother, at this stage would have been probably in her late 70s. That's her Mamgie Evans. So we had to have another one with the Bound side of the family, and here's Dad Bound and John again, and Mamgie Bound, who at that stage was, I think, still living at Bethlambert, out on the road towards Crosswood. And then, of course, we had to have one with my family. So here, standing on the steps of my childhood home in Stanmore in Middlesex, standing at the door again with John, he must have wondered what was going on in all of these pictures, is myself, my mother, and my grandmother, who was my sole surviving grandparent at that stage. And they were all very proud. My mother also had strong reservations about the marriage and the compatibility of the couple, but she got over that. She got to love Coral. And the two grandmothers here were taking the two boys to the school. So here we have John in my mother's arms and a little blonde Aline in his Mamgie's arms, looking at the camera, presumably wielded by Coral herself, at the London Zoo, somewhere they loved to go. We took pictures, obviously, ourselves, and here's one of Coral and I. This is me pre-beard, with Aline, a rather tiny baby, and John looking quizzically at the photograph.
Tell me, where do the children play?
After a few short years in England, a marriage in England, we went and took another momentous step to Australia. This was a very big step because it took us away from family, and we didn't know when we would ever come back. We didn't know we would see our family ever again, and one of the most poignant memories for me is of my father running down the dock at Southampton, waving. This is John in Kennelly Street, with his little bag, ready to go to school, his first day at school. in his new Australian home. And just as a contrast, here's our third boy. Here's Aled, up in the mountains on the many frequent mountain walks we began to take in the snowy mountains of Australia, which I imagine is engraved in the memory of our children. And the next picture is Rebecca, our last child, born in a Dinda Street in Warramanga in Canberra, looking up the camera with a typical cheeky look on her face.
If I ever lose my eyes, if my colors all...
Here's a later photo of Rebecca looking far more charming, with her hair done up, giving her posed smile with some sort of animal in her hands. I can't quite work out. She was a happy child. In fact, the four of them were all happy little children, and their childhood in Australia, I think, was a good one. The family didn't get shot of us quite so easily after we left for Australia, as it turned out. We maintained close contact with the near family over the years through visits and various other means. The close family, for example, the first picture here we have Coral with her sister Maya, her red-haired sister. They're standing on the steps somewhere or another. This is quite a recent picture, but typical of the two of them. They had a fairly prickly relationship, I think, when they were very young, but they're now very, very close and have been for a very long time and in constant contact with each other. Coral's best friend as a child was possibly her brother. Her brother Tony, pictured here some years ago now. They would go mushrooming together and sell the mushrooms in town, and we were also very close to Tony. Here's a picture with my brother John and his wife Jill and my sister Mary. We kept close contact with them too, and here we got together in Kirribilli in Australia. So this is the five of us, together. My sister Mary followed us out to Australia a year or so later, married an Australian and had an Australian child. And this is Mary here with her daughter Erica. She has settled here. She's now living very close to us in Gloucester. So we started a family tradition in a way. A little bit more tragically, we have here a picture of my brother Bill. Bill died rather early, it has to be said, mainly from his own excesses, and he is here with his wife Jackie on the pier front at Leon Sea with Coral. Coral and Bill had a good, strong relationship, probably the closest with my near siblings. The picture here is one of Erica, who's Tony's wife, Tony's second wife, and she's visited us frequently in Australia, and we'll be seeing her again soon. Here's a picture of me at the table with Mamgi joking on my head, as she loved to do, and Margaret, Coral's childhood friend, sat on the other side. We saw the family regularly. And sat down here now, we have Coral with her mother and father and her sister. More recently, we took a picture of some of the older members of the family. Coral's dear Uncle Aline on the right, Uncle Aline bound, and you can see the resemblance with her father, who's standing quite close to her, and female members of the family, Mamgi and Auntie Margaret in the picture too. When we were together in Australia, we would frequently spend Christmas or other events, and here is the first picture of our extended adult family, and this includes a number of people that you haven't seen pictures of before. So we have Tanya here, we have Jasper and Max, two little children, and we have Vanessa sitting next to Aline, and we have Rebecca and Adam, her first husband, with Coral with her family around her, which is the way she loves it. And again, a family photo taken on our veranda where we're living now, up in the Bowman River Valley in the foothills of the Great Dividing Range of Australia. And Rebecca is there with Edward, her second partner towering over everybody. And we have Hillary, Tanya's mother in the picture, and another group of the family in a close together. There's Sean there, Max, there's Jasper, and our typical, and Aled, typical photo. We took two of our children to Australia a long way away, and two of our children were born there and grew up there, and subsequently we took them to Paris and to Washington. But they grew up, and after a while they began to take us to places, some of them quite unexpected. Sometimes we would go to places that we knew, and here we have a picture of us with Aled and Tanya doing a walk around the chateaux in the Loire Valley in France. And here we are. I think this day we'd walked 32 kilometres. So we were having a well-deserved drink in a cafe in Chinon in the Loire Valley. And then something that we don't really do at all is go out on the water, because Coral gets seasick very, very quickly. But we had a wonderful day on Sydney Harbour with Aline and Vanessa guiding the boat around the harbour, the spectacular harbour of Sydney. It was just a joyful day. Things get a bit tougher at times, and here we are with Coral rather tentatively doing ski de fond in Yosemite National Park, where we were taken by Rebecca. You can see it's pretty wild out there, and Coral is looking as though she's not entirely comfortable in this situation. This happened from time to time with our children. Here we are again at Yosemite, looking at, I think, at El Capitan with Rebecca and Adam. They spent quite a bit of time working in America, so we went there to see them, and they took us to places that we wouldn't otherwise have gone. Places we wouldn't otherwise have gone took us eventually, via Rebecca again, to Hawaii, and here we are standing on the edge of a volcano, steaming away on, I think, Kiloa volcano on the Big Island in Hawaii, where we took a holiday halfway across the Pacific with Rebecca in America and us coming from Australia. One of the biggest adventures we had was actually at home, and this was when we bought this property where we're now living, and Aled and Tanya had this whizzo keen idea about what we might do with it. We were a little bit shocked, I think, to be told that goat cheese was the way to go, but we pitched into it, and Coral, who loves animals and loves farming, was one of the first into the bucket with milking the goats, and here she is having a good time with the goats, which she did come to love. And here's the name of our enterprise, Capris, named by Aled, Capris being a species or a genus or something of plant, but close to Capra, the goat, and things of that kind. You can see the extent of this venture in the next picture, with Aled standing amid a sea of goats. Eventually we went up way over 100, and until it became too much for us. We were managing quite a herd, and this is a picture of our valley with Aled moving the goats and the electric fence. At some stage we tricked Coral, or at least my children, particularly I think this was Aline and Kate, tricked Coral into a so-called barbecue out on the west of Sydney. There was no barbecue. There was a small plane that ascended to 10,000 feet where we were pushed out to the door. Kate wasn't feeling up to it really, so somehow I got sucked into it as well, and we both descended by parachute from 10,000 feet, slightly terrified but equally exhilarated. The places your children take you to. Coming back down to earth, one can still be a little bit extreme, and so we went to the extremity of the landmass of Australia, in a sense, which happens to be in the centre of Australia. And here we have a picture of part of the family in the middle of the Simpson Desert in the heart of Australia. and Aline and Aled were engaging in the extreme cycling event of the Simpson Desert Cycle Race. Coral and I were the support team. I had a little blip here. There's a couple of days when I was feeling really a bit worried about it all, but Coral went straight into it and loved every second. And I think the two competitors did too, although they were utterly exhausted by the end. But it was an unequalled experience, something that you couldn't do probably other than in the Sahara or somewhere like that. It was amazing. Then somehow John fairly recently got made redundant from his job. He was working in France. The company he was working for said, "We're going to make you redundant," but there were cries from a branch of theirs in India. So they sent him to India. So we went to India. And we toured around with John a little bit, and Coral, here's a picture of Coral trying to overcome her phobia of snakes. And the snake charmer eventually inveigled her relatively close. The Indian experience was really quite amazing, and with my growing interest in Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism, it was a wonderful place to be for a period of time. So we were taken to India by John. And while we were there, we visited the spectacular Golden Temple of the Sikhs in Amritsar. And here's a picture of the Golden Temple in the centre of the lake. One of them must be the most beautiful sights in the world. And we also went to the holy city of Varanasi. And this is a picture of our hotel, actually. That's that little white bit up on the top of the wall. And below the hotel, a part of the Ghats, where the Indian people do their ablutions in the holy river Ganges, and we were looking out along the Ghats, another breathtaking, unequalled sight. But nearer to home, children would take us to places that weren't too far away. Here's Coral looking over the shoulder of a gentleman reading a newspaper. He's looking a bit cold and rigid, but anyway, she's getting something out of this. This is a picture taken in the Barossa Valley, not far from where Rebecca now lives. So we do travel around Australia to the Barossa and to Longreach, where our children live. And yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had in Australia. John's living in France, so from time to time when we visit him, he's living very close to the Alps. He'll take us to the mountain areas, and every now and then he'll issue a little challenge, and the little challenge will be accepted by Coral generally, and often not accepted by me. So here's Coral accepting the challenge, climbing up the side of, I think it's the Dom d'Oche, and I'm not in this picture because I'm down below looking after the picnic basket, having no head for heights. Coral in a typically adventurous mode. John divorced his French wife a couple of years ago and married a Zambian lady. So somehow or other we got to see the Victoria Falls. So here's the Victoria Falls. To go to Africa for the first time, to Central Africa, was another experience that our children gave us that we wouldn't have given ourselves. Our children enlarge our life. And on that trip we took a little safari, a little tent safari, and here we are on the river Kafue, being looked after. Somewhere in the picture there are probably hippopotami. You can't quite see them, but I can tell you they're there and they're wandering around the tent at night. We're a family that likes events, and Coral particularly likes events, and she's a great driver of events. But as time goes on, the events begin to drive us. So in the first picture here, we've got John in a top hat, Chigwell Private School, whilst we were in America. And here's John, I think he's sort of graduating from the place, with his Uncle Bill and his Auntie Jackie and his Gran. And I think that looks like Aled on the side there. But anyway, this is a great event, the end of school for John. As time went on, people got married. And here's Aled and Tanya getting married in Canberra on the edge of Lake Burley Griffin, with David and Hilary looking on, and Gavin, Aled's best man. So they were a devoted couple looking at each other. It was a beautiful ceremony too, a lovely ceremony. Rather more off the wall, I suppose. We were dragged out to the Simpson Desert again for a really beautiful commitment ceremony for Ali and Vanessa. So here they are exchanging rings on the top of a sand dune out in the Simpson Desert, with an encampment of guests all around them, and a very moving ceremony. There are also academic achievements, and in this particular picture we see Aled and Tanya graduating from the ANU, again standing on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin, having finished their courses, both of them in a very distinctive style. Later on, their junior sister, who had had a rather checkered academic career, ultimately finding that she couldn't stand full-time study, went part-time to Charles Sturt University to do the subject she'd always intended to do, which was enology, to do with winemaking. So here she is with a proud mum, with Coral, having received her degree at Charles Sturt. Here's another marriage event. This is taking place in France, in close to Compiègne, when all of our family, as it was then, got together, with John, who's in the centre at the back, and Anne, who's down on the left, his wife. We all travelled to be there for that event, the family as a unit. And so there's Tanya and Rebecca and Aled and Aline there as well. That was a signal event in a foreign country. That marriage unfortunately did not last, very unfortunately. So second time around, and this year John married Kalenga in Zambia, in the town of Chingola, a copper mining town in the north of Zambia. John met Kalenga, as fate would have it, in a visa queue in New Delhi. We're not sure how things developed from there, but they did. And I have to say, we are really happy to see him happy again, especially with such a loving and beautiful bride. So here we have the two mothers, Kalenga's mother and of course Coral, appearing in the picture with the couple. We put this next one in because it was part of the traditional aspect of a Zambian wedding. So Kalenga's kneeling here in the bride price ceremony, submitting herself to being priced, but of course she's beyond price. But anyway, we fixed on a price, so it was okay, and she's in her traditional dress here. This one is my sister's daughter, Erica, marrying Andrew out in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. So Coral and I are there, and my brother John and his wife Jill, with Erica and with Andrew, on a very happy day for them and for all of us. Coral's dad was of advancing age, of course, by this stage, and on his 80th birthday we all went to Cornwall, to Crackington Haven. I don't think he really understood what was about to happen to him, so when his daughter appeared from Australia, there was a very touching reunion between her and her father. When you have children and they get married, then in the course of events, normally, they have children. And so you get grandchildren. And this is a good thing. So it started with Emma, and here she is smiling delightfully. Something that she's lost a little bit of lately, but it'll come back, I'm sure. And she's in high glee about something or other here that she's got in her hand. She was the first of our grandchildren. And then there was her sister Alice. Now they're both teenagers now, but this was the baby stage, with the gorgeous curly dark hair inherited no doubt from their Basquet's mother, Anne. After that, of course, Aled and Tanya began to have children, and here we have 3 of them, tucked up in bed with Mamgie, a place they like to be, very comfortably, and with Jasper with his chin stuck on the end of the bed, fooling about, as is usual. And Mamgie looking very happy there among her grandchildren. The next one is one of Megan, and this is Megan in I think, a typical pose, rather pensive, looking out at the ocean, somewhere around Noosa, I imagine. Maybe wondering what it's all about, wondering what the sea is about. She can be very quiet and reflective in this way, but she can talk a blue streak when she has to, and which she often does. Then we have Bryn, the last of Aled and Tanya's children. Here he is, ready to go to school. He's 5 years old, he's full of beans, he's ready to go. He's got his blue shorts on, his blue shirt, he's got his big Aussie hat to shade him from the sun, and his little work boots, and on his back he has a pack almost his own size, ready to contain all the exercise books and other things that he's going to need at school. And finally, the latest edition, in just a month or so ago, we have William. William is not ready to smile and have a big personality, but you can see he's a bouncing, lively baby. He was a little bit earlier than we thought, but he's in great shape. So that's grandchildren, and we are so grateful to have them. Friends have always been very important to Coral, as we saw from an early age with Margaret and various friends around her village in Wales, and she's had a host of friends through her life, many of whom she keeps in touch with one way or another, some of whom unfortunately have passed on, but friendship is a big part of her life. So we start off here with Coral dressed up for the nines for the dance in town in Aberystwyth, and her friend Cerys, who seems to have spilled something on her dress, looks like red wine or beer, but they're out there ready to have a good time. Good time, girls. Look at the high heels. They knew how to have a good time. And then here's another picture of them outside the hairdressers, with Coral in the middle, tiny Coral as always, and Cerys on the right, and another friend, Glenys Evans, on the left. They were staunch friends in their teenage years. When we moved to Australia, the first place we lived was, or the first long place we lived was in Kennelly Street in Curtin in Canberra. And here's a picture of some of the people who we made friends with then and who remained our friends and still do, are still with us. In the background there is Bronwyn, in the foreground is Janet, next to Coral on the left. And also on the right of Bronwyn is Betsy, who is to prove one of our closest and longest lasting friends. When we went to Paris, Coral formed a very strong friendship with her hairdresser, interestingly Richard. So here we have a picture of Coral and Richard a little bit later on a visit to Paris, celebrating something or other, probably our visit I would think. They remained close friends through a long period of time. When Coral went into EJ's restaurant and eventually took over the kitchen, it was a scene of high activity. 7 days a week, virtually, all day, dinner, lunchtime. And so the friends rallied round, and on the end of the counter here you can see Betsy. People still smoking indoors, very incorrect. And on the right you see Charles, Betsy's husband. These two people were our other family in Canberra. They were very, very close. We also made a host of friends through my work at the Treasury. I won't try and recount the names of all of the people in this picture. There are quite a number here, but these were people with whom we became very friendly. We all got together, in this case, on a trip to, I think it was Gundarimba, and spent a weekend there. And so with them, with the men and their wives, we had a good time all together. And this was frequently repeated in various places, particularly in the snowy mountains where we would go walking. Early in the days in EJ's restaurant, a young English girl came in and asked for a job, and Coral said, yes, you can have a job, but first you've got to work for a day and I'll see whether you're any good. You couldn't get away with that now. Jane, to her credit, said, yep, I'll do that. And she turned out to be an excellent bar girl and became a very long-term friend with her husband Michael. And you can see Jane had a great sense of fun. Here's two people who are special in Coral's life. They're called the two Lizzies. Liz Smith and Liz Packer they were at the time, and they were chefs or sous chef in the restaurant in Canberra. Coral's still in touch with them 35 years later, and we'll be going to see Liz, a big Liz as we call her, fairly soon. She's moved down to the Barossa Valley. Here's a picture of Mum Giles. We called her Mum because we didn't have a mum at the time, and she used to do the washing up in the restaurant. She was a cheerful, single, older lady, very Australian, could give out with a stream of obscenities if she hit her head on something, but she was cheerful and hard-working, a typical Australian woman. This picture is Coral's golf coach, Gary. His original name was Gary Player, but he had to change it as being a golf coach to Gary Edwin because there was already a Gary Player. So here he is with Kath, his wife. He coached Coral in golf for one lesson and advised her immediately to give it up, which she did. But we remained strong friends nevertheless. This picture is of John Ferguson. I'm not quite sure how John... I think he came into our life again through EJ's. He's standing on the veranda, I think, of his house just outside Canberra. John's a straightforward, straight-talking South African. We struck up a friendship with him and we've remained in touch with him over the last, as I say, 35 years. We spoke to him just a few weeks ago. This is a picture of Lillian Horton-Stevens, who is the wife of my colleague Keith, or my ex-colleague Keith Horton-Stevens. And somehow or other, Coral forged a very close friendship with Lillian. She's on the left here. She is a French-Algerian woman. And on the right is Helen, another very close friend of Coral's, her running friend indeed. So that's... and this is a picture of Helen herself. And Coral must have run hundreds of kilometres with Helen, and we'll come back to that side of our life a little later. This is a picture of the Jones family, Brian Jones, down on the left there. We rediscovered Brian. He was in digs with me at university. He was quite a close friend then. And 10, 15 years later, we discovered him in Australia. He'd emigrated to Australia, and here he is with his wife, Ray, and his children, Bronwyn and Gwyn. Coral is currently in China with Ray and Brian touring. This one is a rather a mysterious photo. Looking away from us here is Peter Kilburn, who's a Canadian friend of ours, a friend that we made in Washington, I think. In Washington, or probably in Paris, actually. But here we're sitting on the shores of Lac Tremblant. You can see Coral's just been for a run. Peter hasn't just been for a run, he's been for a rest. Good friends. We're still in touch with them. And here are some Washington friends. These are people that I met through my Treasury connections in Washington, D.C. Hela Juntz, who's a chief economist at one of the Chicago banks, and Oscar and Fern Macau. Oscar was in the US Treasury. And our common interest was through food. They were great lovers of food, which is obvious with Fern, I guess, without being unkind. This is a picture of Sean. Sean was one of Rebecca's first boyfriends. She will not want to be looking at this picture. Sean was an unsuccessful boyfriend, but when he broke up with Rebecca, he is a very sad boy. And Coral was basically a support to him through that period, and he's never forgotten that. He's now a very successful photographer in New York, something he always intended to do from being a waiter in Sydney, but he's never forgotten the support that Coral gave him in that time. We hear from him all the time. Next we have Paula. Paula is a friend of ours. She lives down the road from us in the Bowman River Road. She is one of our latest friends. We've only known her a few years, but it's an indication of Coral's capacity to make new friends all the time, that she struck up this perhaps a little unlikely friendship with Paula. We love her. This is a picture of Coral with Janine. She met Janine in a class, a Pilates class, I think, in Sydney. Recognised that she was French, that she was in Sydney, and approached her, and they struck up a great friendship, where Janine spoke in broken English and Coral spoke in broken French. But we got on very well with Janine and Gérard. This is a little bit of a special photograph. This is Veronica, whom we've known now for probably over 20 years, lived close to us in Stanley Street, and we're in contact with Veronica all the time when we go down to Sydney to stay in our studio there. Veronica's a very close, very supportive friend, and we were drawn even closer by the death of her husband Doug during the time that we've known her. A very good woman. This is a bit of a retro in a sense, just to show how long these friendships are. This is Margaret, who you'd have seen in the very earliest photos, and here's Margaret in her 60s with her husband Billy, and we are still in close touch with Margaret, Coral's perhaps first friend, and this is an event somewhere in Wales where we're all having a drink and a meal together. Another friend made whilst we were in Paris. This is Joan Kearns. Whilst we were in Paris, we met Joan and Peter Kearns, and we never lost touch with them. Somehow we forged a friendship. Joan subsequently divorced Peter, and we're still in touch with Joan. When we moved to Gloucester, Coral's brother Tony told us that there was a woman living in Gloucester who was Welsh, whom he knew, had been at school at the same time as Tony. So here we have Coral and Marcia sitting on her quad runner, reading Adolen, the local newspaper from Llanelli, and basically conversing in Welsh, the only person within the area of Gloucester, an unlikely friendship, but forged through the Welsh language, which Coral retains to this day. Coral's made new friends everywhere. Recently she went to Morocco with her friend Liz, who's on the right of this picture, and made a whole bunch of new friends. I didn't go to Morocco. Another old friend here is on the right is Heather Evans. Heather's husband Ted and I were colleagues in Treasury. Ted went on to be the Secretary of the Treasury, so you'll find his name on Australian banknotes, but sadly separated from Heather, with whom we remain in touch, a good woman too. As a result of the internship program on our farm here, we have French students every year for the past, I think, 8 years, and we've had such a good time. One of them, Robin, who is on the left of this picture, snuggled up to Coral, insisted when we came to Paris that we meet his family. So we met his brothers, Maxence and Dorian. So in subsequent years, as guests of Coral and I, Maxence 1 year and Dorian the subsequent year came and spent some months with us on the property. And we had such a good time, and we've got to know the Jacot family, and every time we go to France they insist that we come see them and spend time with them, which we love to do.
Like cherries, it's good to touch the green, green grass of home.
The next section is somewhat idiosyncratic, but I felt we had to include it because the people here were an important part of our lives. They were the au pairs. Elizabeth was one of our early au pairs in Paris. You can see Coral here with the big hairdo. And Elizabeth was a Nigerian au pair, a very loving person and very calm, beautiful woman. And so she stayed with us for a while until the unfortunate racial prejudice of our concierge drove her out. Sad, but we had the experience of somebody very special. Sian was another type altogether. Sian on the left was from Wales, and she was with us for a considerable time. Here they're standing outside our apartment in Paris with Rebecca, Aled, John and Aline, and their friend Philip Kearns, who has just broken his legs, or one of his legs, on the ski fields. Helen is getting married. Helen was our au pair in Washington. She's marrying Livio here, her long-term boyfriend. She came and helped to rescue us, particularly at times when Coral had to return to the restaurant in Canberra. And finally, in Washington was Sylvia. Sylvia was going to go on to be a classic scholar. She's a young English woman, very, very bright, very lively, very cheerful, and again was part of the au pair rescue team in Washington. In our marriage, we occupied something like 27 different houses. This was not by design, I have to say. It just happened for one reason or another. A couple of times we were returning to the same house, but we lived in a lot of different houses. When we went to Australia, we lived at number 14, Kennelly Street. It was our first home there. Here's Aline, cheerfully smiling, as he always did as a little boy, and Coral with the big hair, me beardless, and John sitting snuggled up. That was our first impression of neighbours in Australia, a good impression. Coral and I dressed up outside of our house. It was Mary's wedding day. This is our house in Adinda Street in Warramanga. We didn't own this house, it was a government house. So we were living in what the English would call a council house. But I can tell you it was a pretty good house with a big garden, and it was sort of our first independent home. We loved it. We had a penchant for extending, renovating, changing. And this is the wreckage out at the back of our first house that we owned in Fisher in Canberra. It was a little house with cedar walls and Oregon timber beams. It was a beautiful little house, but wasn't really big enough, so we extended it with the help of a local builder. I'd like to add that the fence and the pergola were constructed by me, a very untypical activity for me. One of the dreamiest places we had was on a ridge above the tiny town village of Bungendore, close to Lake George, near to Canberra. This was a house we extended to, and you can get a feeling for the Australian bush, perched on a hilltop, looking down on Lake George, which came and went with the seasons, and Coral leaning on a tree proprietorially on the first stretch of ground that we bought, which I think was probably not more than 10 acres, maybe 20. We altered a lot of our houses. When we went to Sydney, we bought an old terrace house, and immediately Coral's mental activity went into overdrive, and we ripped the guts out of it. And here are the builders ripping the guts out of it and totally rebuilding the place into something which I must say was vastly superior to what we took over from the people that were there before us. It was indeed, as you can see, turned into a beautiful, small, cosy terrace house where the two of us could live right in the heart of Sydney, close to everything you could wish to see or do. Finally, we came out to the Bowman River, out beyond Gloucester in the ranges, and here's the house that we had then. It was not exactly tumbled down, but you couldn't really call it a livable house. It was small, it was old-style Australian, it was clad in weatherboard, it had the usual tin roof, it had a driveway that was no more than a track, and so this was a sort of a for the moment at least, our final resting place, but not our final house. About 100 or 150 metres from that house you've just seen is the house that we live in now. And this was the house that we built. This was Coral's dream house, the place we were going to settle. So I'm hoping that this is where we're settled, but I can't be sure. But we do love this house and we love this place, and it's a splendid situation, as you can see, and a splendid place to be. There are two pictures here. This is a picture of Wales, close to where Coral came from, close to Llanellar, and you can see the rolling hills and the valley and the curve, the slopes and the green pastures. And this is where we are now. So you can see the valley and the hills, the sloping pastures and the forests. I think we've come home.
Those dear old folks that loved me long ago.
Coral's story wouldn't be complete without reference to the culinary art, an art that she developed probably from, I guess, her late 20s, maybe early 30s onward. Paris was a very strong influence. She's always loved French cuisine, and so when we went to Paris, she took lessons with an American, by the way. But anyway, she took lessons in cooking to advance her experience, and it never left her. So when we went back to Canberra, we bought a restaurant with my sister Mary and her husband, and this is it. This is EJ's, the first place where Coral managed a restaurant and ultimately became the chef, because the chef that she had hired was stealing various items from the restaurant, so we had to dismiss her summarily. Here's the kitchen team. Coral is on the front there, second from the left. Behind her is Barry, my sister Mary's husband, who was the equal partner in the restaurant. Also looking extremely dozy in the back row is Charles, and the rest of the team who made the chefs, the bar people at the restaurant are lined up with her there, and they were a good team. Coral here is framed nicely in our house in Fisher by her cookery books and the jogger's prayer, preparing something at the counter. Something detailed by the look of it, which it would normally be. I guess we included this picture because Coral's sitting in a typical pose with her apron on, smiling, about to cook up a storm somewhere or another. Aline tells me that it's probably in Washington in the library there. In the course of cooking, friends came. Joanna Minogue, on Coral's right here, was a very strong friend, and they were sort of in partnership in catering in Sydney. And Coral and Joanna went to various notable places in Sydney in the course of their catering career. Joanna regrettably no longer with us, but definitely in our memories. From time to time we would meet somebody famous in the cooking world, and here's Coral with Anton Mosimann, the famous Swiss chef, in the casino in Sydney, which was where I was working at the time, and Coral of course found her way from the gaming floor into the kitchen. At one stage in her cooking career, she somehow teamed up with an odd Greek character called James, who lured her into launching his latest Greek restaurant in Sydney in Double Bay, and so Coral launched the restaurant. Unfortunately, after a few weeks, Coral's eye to detail was too much for James, and they parted company but remained very good friends. This is the kitchen team. This is in James Greek restaurant. Yeah, here they are, the kitchen team. Coral, chief chef, with the kitchen team. Another place that our children took us was on a sort of vegetable juice starvation place called Mullaney. It's sort of like a sophisticated concentration camp where you're fed minimal rations. But towards the end of the week, you're allowed to cook something or other. And here's Coral right into it at Mullaney, cooking away some sort of vegetable matter with two of the people who work there, always in the forefront. When we went out to the Simpson Desert, Aline needed a support team, so we were part of the support team. Of course, who was going to prepare the food? Well, it was the woman on the right. So there she is, having prepared some food in her best chef's boots and shorts and singlet, and there Aled in the background. But look at the desert, kitchen in the desert. This is just another pose, I think a typical pose of Coral working precisely on food, concentrating on it, getting it right. All my life I've run. As a little boy I'd run to play, we'd run in the Scouts, even ran in a bit of competition at school. So when Coral and I got married I continued running. And when we came to Australia the environment was good for that, so I did. Sometime, probably, it was in the early 80s, Coral, when we were in Washington, started to run. Up until that time, squash and various other activities have been enough. So she started to run probably in 1981, 82. And then sometime in the late 80s, she overtook me. And I never really caught up with her again. Her enthusiasm for running became as strong as mine. So she would run with her brother Tony, who was a very good runner indeed. She would run with her daughter-in-law and her two sons. That's outside Stanley Street. And here's another one with me. She had actually run with me from time to time, and I would endeavour to keep up with her, which was getting a bit tough. She would run particularly with her friend Helen. I'm not sure where they run. I think they're running around Lake Burley Griffin here. They have run hundreds of kilometres together. Coral at this stage had the curly-haired look, so it doesn't look quite like her. When she and Helen ran together, they would often win prizes in their age category. Here they are with the Australian senior coach, Pat Clahessy, having won the veterans medals in the probably half marathon, I think. She loved to run with her sons, and here she is with Aled and Aline looking particularly proud, having finished the course with his mother. It was a good way of being together. As I say, she would sometimes even run with me, and I think in this one we were running a 20k around Lake Burley Griffin and finished together on this one. She would run half marathons. She's running the Lane Cove Half Marathon here, leading a whole bunch of blokes, which is the way things developed. She would run marathons. This is after a quite important event in her life when she ran the Sydney Olympic Marathon distance in the year before the Olympics when they were testing out the course. So she completed the 42 kilometres in fine style. It was the last of her 3 marathons, and felt that enormous sense of achievement of running the 42 kilometres in or close to the Olympic year. Coral loves to go places, different places, extreme places, and I don't always accompany her. In this case here, she's looking up towards Mount Everest. She walked from somewhere in Nepal to Everest Base Camp. A 30-day trek there and back with two close friends, Dean Wallace and Sue Chessel. And I think this was a little bit of a turning point in her life, to see the high mountains. Here are the three of them looking up at Everest, or at least Everest is in the background. It was a tough trek. It was among the Nepalese people whom she came to admire greatly. She saw the great mountain peaks, the great snowfields, and it really ignited an even stronger love of travel.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
She also, for the first time perhaps, took an interest. Here are the Nepalese Buddhist monks in procession. She took an interest in the culture. In the background is Amadablan, one of the great peaks of the Himalayas. But there were different places. So here we are in France. Coral with a few friends lined up together in, I think it was Dole in eastern France. So the variety between the high mountain peaks and the culture of Nepal, and the eastern part of France with the culture of France, she loved them both. And last year we took a trip together. This time I was persuaded to go to Japan, where we spent time in Hakone, in a Japanese inn, and we dressed up in style. And here's Coral, dressed up in style in a kimono, looking the part and loving the Japanese culture and, of course, the Japanese cuisine. Our life together has been bookended by dogs. We've had a number of dogs. We've owned a number of dogs. We've come into possession of a number of dogs. So through our married life, we've probably had dogs more often than we haven't had dogs. They came in all shapes and sizes. Here in the background is our dog, Grip. You can't see him really because he was a black shadow. He was one of our earliest dogs, and the children loved him and he loved the children, and he went everywhere with them in Canberra.
So I love my dog as much as I love you.
Then we went on to blue heelers, some of whom needed to be washed. This is probably Bruch, an ill-fated dog who followed Aline across a road in Fisher and had an unfortunate meeting with a car. In Washington we had an idiosyncratic Old English sheepdog. This was a golf ball thieving dog who would make his way to the local golf course and nick the balls on the green as they were about to be hit into the hole. He gained a reputation around there. He's being told off by Coral here and taking absolutely no notice. This is Smike. Smike was a lovable blue heeler with all the blue heeler traits. Unfortunately, he had a blue heeler trait of aggression for other dogs combined with a deafness that made it impossible to call him off once he'd got into attack mode. He died also, sadly, having taken on two bull terriers. Then there was Traddles, who we had at the property in Bungendore, along with Mary the donkey. They got on quite well. You can see there's a bit of caution here, but Traddles was a very cheerful little dog. We inherited Minda, which was Alid and Tanya and Aline and Nessa's dog. Minda was a typical, beautiful red Kelpie dog, sheepdog, lovely, loyal, bit uncertain around children, but just a gorgeous dog. Ultimately, we were joined on the farm by Baku, one of the loveliest dogs, an unexpected present from Vanessa's sister Joss and her partner Al. We didn't know what to expect. He was a present for Aled and Tanya. We took him back to the farm and he was superb. A superb cattle dog, strong, forceful, and just great with children. And here I think this is his progeny. This is probably Lily Pilly Frangipani that he's giving a little lick to. And as time went on, we added other dogs. Coral loves dogs. These are three of the current dogs of the farm: Tambo, Lily Pilly, and Sassafras. They're looking through our back door because they're looking for the soft touch. The soft touch is Coral. They are awaiting 3 bones which are about to be given to them outside the back door. They assemble outside our back door practically every day we're here in the expectation of bones. Coral and I have been together now for more than 52 years, which is a very long time for a marriage. Particularly in our generation. Marriages in history never lasted that long because people didn't last that long. Marriages now don't last that long because people don't stay together that long. So our marriage in some respects is unique. It's shared with some friends of ours have similar longevity, but it's quite rare. And so when we look through our life together, we've had some ups and downs. We've had some serious ups and downs, I have to admit, mainly caused by my downs, I have to say. Coral's loyalty has been outstanding through the whole period. So we stayed together over the years. When we were young, we had good times together. We would go occasionally dancing, not as often as Coral would like, but perhaps as often as as I could stand. And we would have a good time laughing together, we would joke together, we shared a sense of humour, we shared a love of wine. We would go on formal events and informal events, always together. We would be in our Aussie mode, or we might be in another sort of mode. We wouldn't dress up very often, but we would be seen by our friends and by our family pretty much as a couple. As I say, there were difficult times when, particularly when we were separated from any period of time and we had to survive without each other for a few months for one reason or another. Through the course of our life, we would try to engage with each other and with the larger family so that we would cement the whole structure of the family with the two of us. And I think that was that was something that we would do in our life together. So we would run together, we would walk together, we would dance together, sometimes looking in a little peculiar dress or a peculiar mode, but in a sense together. We spent a lot of time travelling around France, and I think that for us was a very good time. It was a very good time for the family, but it was a very good time for us because we were thrown into a foreign environment, an environment which we didn't know, and which I think we had to help each other out. I had a little bit of French at that time, not much, but Coral had none. And I have to pay tribute to her bravery in going out shopping, often to the embarrassment of her increasingly bilingual children. So I think that particular period was a good one. From time to time I would make a special effort. I remember going up onto the hills outside Canberra and arranging a breakfast for her, breakfast in a tent. That was a special event. I'm not so good at special events as Coral is. She's really good at them. But I would try every now and again to make it special for her. But more often than not, she would be making it special for me, organising a huge party for my 50th birthday or some sort of restaurant meal or something like that, which would surprise me at the time. So those sorts of signal events with friends, and doing odd things too. So we would try out new things. I remember trying out canoeing on Lac Tremblant in Canada, and we tried out canoeing. So we went down to the shore with Peter Kilman, our host, and Coral got into the canoe and sat down. And so I'd handed her in and got her steadied up, and then I got in, and she grabbed hold of my hand. and the boat capsized, and somehow or other I ended up in the water and she didn't. She's got a great sense of slapstick humour. So when I fall into the water or trip over something and fall down a set of stairs, the immediate sympathy isn't there. There's generally a bout of laughter before she can bring herself to rescue me. So that I think that's a good side. You know, I like slapstick myself, but yeah, when you're at the other end of it, it isn't quite so good. So every now and again she'll get a big cuddle. We are a very tactile couple. We like to be close to each other and to be basically in touch with each other, and I think that keeps things in a good way. And of course we've been to so many remarkable places together. Most recently when we were in Zambia, we were stood on the top of a giant rock looking over the whole of the south of Zambia with our hosts at the safari lodge, with the sun going down, and having dinner sitting out not in the desert but out in the wilds there. And we've had some very special times together. We would do things like go on an elephant ride. So we'd be together on the back of an elephant, not something that I would have done, but Coral likes to push out the boundaries a little bit from time to time. That I think is typical of our relationship. We try constantly to renew it, and when it goes bad, as it sometimes did, we try to put it together again, and I feel now it's together again. I think I've said enough to tell you that Coral's a special person. She's done a lot of things in her life, and she admits, I've done more than I could ever have expected that I would do. I've seen more than I've expected. I've achieved more than I expected. I've done a variety of things that I never could have conceived as being that little girl back there in Llanellar in Wales, way back in the 40s and 50s of the years. And I think most of it she's enjoyed, and here's a picture of her showing her enjoyment of whatever it was that was going on at the time. She's also done a number of great things, and one memorable thing that I want to wind up with was an award that she received, and a community award in Sydney for cleaning up the streets of East Sydney, basically by going around tackling recalcitrant dumpers of rubbish. So here she is with, I think it's the mayor, receiving an award for the work that she did over several years with Veronica's deceased husband, Doug. The two of them went out and tackled the problem. So it's been a long life together, and we've had a good time. And she's only 70, and I'm only 72 or 73, I fail to remember. So we've got probably another 20 years left.
Down the